Hi, the doctor's in. I'm Dr. LB, and I am here to help you through your math difficulties. Today, we look at complex and imaginary numbers. We start off the discussion with the imaginary unit. The imaginary unit, which we denote by the letter I, is called the square root of -1. And if you square both sides, I squared equals -1. So, a complex number is defined to be a plus bi, where a is called the real part, it's a real number. B is called the imaginary part. B is a real number, but it goes with I, and that's why it's called the imaginary part. So a plus bi is the standard form for a complex number. So what does it mean for two complex numbers to be equal? A plus bi equals c plus di. Well, they are equal if the real portions are equal, A and C, and the imaginary portions are equal, B and D. So we're going to look at a couple of problems where we simplify. So we have the square root of -16. Now, prior to knowing what a real number was, we would say this is not a real number if you were given this in an algebra course. Well, no, it's not a real number. It's a complex number. What we can do is we can use the rules of square roots that says that, hey, we can break up -16. The square root of -16 is the square root of 16 times the square root of -1. So the square root of 16 is 4. Square root of -1 is I. So this is 4i. Suppose we have 3 times the square root of -5 times 2, the square root of -8. Well, if we look, we have 3. Now, the square root of -5, we can break that down to the square root of 5 and the square root of -1, which is I. The second component, we have 2. Then we can break the square root of 8 down. The square root of 8 is what? 8 is 4 times 2, so the square root of 4 is 2. And we have what? The square root of 2. And then that square root of -1, we have I. Now you want to make sure that you don't confuse this I with being under that radical. So when we combine what we have here, we have 3 times 2 times 2, which is 12. The square root of 5 times the square root of 2 can be combined to be the square root of 10. And then we have I times I, which is I squared, but we've already said that I squared is -1. So our answer is -12 square root of 10. Now our next problem, we have -2 plus the square root of 7, that whole quantity squared. We can rewrite this as -2 plus I times the square root of 7 times -2 plus I times the square root of 7. And if we use FOIL, we'll get 4 minus the inner and outer terms will combine to give us -4i square root of 7 and minus 7i squared. Now remember that I squared is -1, so it's going to combine with this -7 and make +7, and 7 plus 4 is 11. Then we'll simply write our 4i square root of 7. So we can also, when we're solving by the quadratic formula, we may get a complex number back as well. So let's use the quadratic formula here. Now remember, we can only use the quadratic formula when this is in standard form. Now standard form means that we're going to have a 0 on one side. So we have to bring this 6 over. So we'll have 3x squared minus 4x plus 6 equals 0. Here, A is going to be 3. B is going to be -4. And C is going to be 6. So we have x equals -b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2 times a. So you're just replacing a, b, and c into the quadratic formula. So let's clean this up a bit. Those double negatives will make positive 4. 4 squared is 16. 4 times 3 times 6 is 72 all over 6. So we have 4 plus or minus. Now 16 minus 72 is negative 50. It's negative 56. So we have negative 56 on the radical. We can say I times the square root of 56 all over 6. Now we can't leave our answer like that. And the reason why is because the square root of 56 is not in its simplest form. 56 contains a factor that is a perfect square. We can break 56 down as 4 times 14. So that this becomes 4 plus or minus 2i square root of 14 all over 6. Now this is still not in simplest form because I have a greatest common factor in my numerator of 2. So I can factor that out. And it can simplify with that 6. And so 2 goes into 6 3 times. So we have 2 plus or minus I square root of 14 over 3. Now, you can leave your answer like that. Some books will allow that. But the true standard form, this 2/3, has to be separate from the rest of that problem. So the true standard form is 2/3 plus or minus the square root of 14 over 3i. So remember, Dr. LB is always in. Please come back for more math help.